rolls of tobacco. Now, they used some, but what did they keep some for?
Trade.
With Native Americans or Indians to see, they didn't know what they were going to run into, hostile, non-hostile. Might be a good thing to make good relations as if you had some tobacco, which they are not going to have. So 130 rolls of tobacco, some to be used as gifts to the Indians they would encounter and some to use for themselves. They took 1,100 doses of emetic, which is on your ID sheet. Emetic. They took 1,100 doses of emetic. You know what that is?
Advil?
Okay, what happens if you get a bad stomach ache, or you got to think about these guys are going. Yeah, well, kind of, not exactly. The digestion problem's already happened. You've already got a horrible stomach ache. What's the best way to get rid of a horrible stomach ache? That's right. Emetic was a dose you would take that would make you vomit. And they took it, but they took it because that was the best way to clear your system if you were sick. Okay? So if you had the flu or something, or you were sick, digestive problems, you think about what they're going to eat on this trip. It could probably give you a stomach ache. I mean, I go home and eat 3 or 4 things at night and I have a stomach ache. The stuff they're going to eat is going to give them stomach or digestion problems. So they took 1,100 doses of emetic, which is an agent that basically induces vomiting, so they could clear their system. They also took 3,500 doses of a diaphoretic. Anybody know what a diaphoretic does? And you would really want this if you had the flu. What's a diaphoretic? What's it make you do? Okay, now most people think that, but if you have the flu, what's the best way to break a flu?
Sweat it out.
That's right. So what this diaphoretic did, it induced sweating. So they can sweat the disease out. Very good. So the diaphoretic was used to induce sweating during an illness.
How much did they take?
3,500 doses. So those are the items they took with them. Now, kiddos, you're doing good. Certainly they took diaries, and certainly they took canteens, and certainly they took, boats and that. But I mean, these were kind of the essentials that they took. Compasses. But the essentials to survive is what they took. Now, Lewis and Clark were both stern disciplinarians. And they believed in stern discipline. They knew that along this journey, if you did not have discipline, you were going to have trouble. Okay, so they were both very stern disciplinarians. And I'm going to give you some examples of that. And this will answer Kendrick's question here. They were told before they left not to get drunked up because they didn't want them on the trip with a hangover, and they weren't going to be drinking all along the trip because that was not going to bode them well either. They had a job to do. This is a military operation. So prior to the trip, Lewis and Clark confined several men because they had visited a grog store prior to departure. What's grog? G-R-O-G. What's the name for grog? Not whiskey, but rum. Rum. So these men disobeyed orders and went to a grog store, G-R-O-G, which had rum. And that upset Lewis and Clark, and so they confined them to their quarters. They had to be in their quarters before they even departed. He wouldn't let them have any freedom, okay, because they had visited a grog store. Once they started, and we'll get to this in a minute, one man received 100 lashes and was sent back downriver because he was a discipline problem. So once they took off, the guy screwed up, they gave him 100 lashes with a whip and sent him back. Okay, got rid of him. That's another example of their stern discipline. One man received 100 lashes and was sent back downriver. 2 men, John Newman and Moses Reed, were court-martialed early in the expedition. What were they court-martialed for? What did they get in trouble for? What could you get court-martialed for? I'll tell you, George Custer during the Indian Wars, he just shot you if you did this.
They were fighting each other.
No.
They were shooting it.
No. Back in the campaign of 1876 during the Indian Wars, George Custer had a reputation. If you did this, he didn't court-martial, he shot you. What? Desertion and mutiny. Okay, so 2 guys, John Newman and Moses Reed, were court-martialed and sent back for mutiny and desertion. So they were disciplinarians. They did not screw around. You weren't going to be on that trip with them not tending to business. What's that? They deserted. Yeah, you can't do that. Once it's a military operation, you can't just say, I'm done, I'm not going to go. You're in the Army now, right? And they deserted, and they caught him and court-martialed him. And like I said, back in the old days, George Custer, he just shot you. You deserted, he just shot you. Okay, we'll talk about that later. So, at 4 p.m. on May 14th of 1804, 4 p.m. on May 14th, 1804, the Corps of Discovery departed from the mouth of the Missouri River near present-day St. Louis, Missouri. At 4 p.m. on May 14th, 1804, the Corps of Discovery departed from the mouth of the Missouri River near present-day St. Louis, Missouri. Now, as we mentioned yesterday, was it Elizabeth that gave us the Continental Divide deal yesterday? The majority of the journey will be upstream because they'll be going toward the Pacific Ocean. The Continental Divide isn't until you get in the Rocky Mountains near present-day Montana. So most of this expedition out to the Pacific will be upstream. And only when the Continental Divide is located in present-day Montana would the expedition be traveling downstream. And as we mentioned yesterday, that's going to be in this area here. So they're going to travel quite a ways before they ever get to go downstream. Okay? Which I can't imagine that. That's what they did. You'll see some video of it later. Well, they traveled about 3 months. About 3 months, and on August 20th of 1804, traveled about 3 months, and on August 20th of 1804, Sergeant Charles Floyd Jr. died on the expedition. So after traveling for approximately 3 months, on August 20th, 1804, Sergeant Charles Floyd Jr. died on the expedition. Anybody know what happened to him? I'll tell you who. No, I would tell you that Kobe Tigner might relate to this.
Appendicitis.
No?
Appendicitis.
He had a burst. Charles Floyd had a burst appendix. Now I don't know if you know anything about that, but basically your appendix, if it bursts, it just puts poison into your insides, and it would kill you quickly. And so, in Tigner's case, it was good that his appendix didn't burst, and he got it fixed prior to that. Okay, I actually had my appendix out the day man landed on the moon. That's no kidding. Maybe that was the destiny to go into history. I don't know. But anyway, if your appendix breaks, you are in bad shape, and then obviously his did because it's 1804, and he died. Now here's the amazing thing about his death. Of all the dangers these guys are going to face, all the way there and back, which we'll get into, he is the only fatality of this entire expedition. I think that's amazing, absolutely amazing. Because there were so many, opportunities for people to be killed on this thing. Okay? Well, not long after Floyd's death, the expedition ran into some serious trouble. Not long after Floyd's death, the expedition ran into some serious problems. As they were traveling up the Missouri River, the Corps of Discovery encountered the Teton Sioux Indians. As they are traveling up the Missouri River, they encounter the Teton Sioux Indians. And these Indians were very territorial. Okay, this is our area. And this particular Indian tribe, the Teton Sioux, controlled a specific sector of the Missouri River in which this expedition was traveling through. And it didn't go over really well that these strangers were invading this land that was controlled by the Teton Sioux Indians. And the expedition came face to face with these hostile Indians, and a wrong move on either side would have been disastrous to the Corps of Discovery because they were vastly outnumbered. Okay? So, they come in contact with these hostile Sioux Indians, Teton Sioux Indians. They control a specific sector of the Missouri River that the expedition was traveling, And as the expedition became face to face with these hostile Indians, a wrong move on either side could cause some serious problems. Well, Lewis and Clark tried their best to communicate with the Sioux chief Black Buffalo. Tried very hard to try to, his best, I don't know how you do that, you don't speak the same language, but they tried like crazy to communicate with Black Buffalo and assure him that they were not a danger to the tribe, they were just kind of passing through, I guess. And luckily for the Lewis and Clark expedition, Black Buffalo waved off his men and he allowed the expedition to continue through the area that they controlled. So they tried to communicate, evidently they communicated in a point where Black Buffalo was satisfied that these men were not a threat to his tribe and he let them pass. But a wrong move, you know, one of 45 guys, or less than that now, but one of 40 guys makes a wrong move or reacts differently in fear or whatever, then you got no Lewis and Clark expedition. So you can see the good discipline that was instilled by Lewis and Clark probably made a difference in them getting through this problem. Well, they continue to travel, and after traveling 1,600 miles on October 24th of 1804, Lewis and Clark and their expedition set in for the winter at the Mandan villages. Okay, so after traveling 1,600 miles upstream on the Missouri River, on October 24th of 1804, the Lewis and Clark expedition settles in for the winter at the Mandan villages. Anybody know where that was located today? Your present day? Have you ever heard of Mandan, of anything? Mandan, North Dakota. Yeah, present day Mandan, North Dakota. Okay, so they're in this area over here. Now there were 4,000 Mandan Indians that were located there, and they were friendly Indians. So the villages, the Mandan villages, had a population of approximately 4,000 Indians, and they were located near present-day Mandan, North Dakota. So the expedition is going to spend the next 5 months there. They're not going to travel through the winter. That would not be wise. And they're going to encounter some bone-chilling cold. Temperatures drop as low as 45 degrees below zero. It's one of the coldest winters ever, and they just happened to be the winter they were there. So they're in Mandan, North Dakota for 5 months. They're spending time with the Mandan Indians at the Mandan villages, and they encounter temperatures as low as 45 degrees below zero. It was a very, very cold winter. So you can see why they weren't traveling. Can you imagine traveling in that kind of weather, trying to survive? Well, during this 5 months they spent at the villages, Lewis and Clark hired a French-Canadian fur trader to serve as a guide for the expedition when they left in the spring. And his name was Toussaint Charbonneau. Toussaint Charbonneau. So during the winter, Lewis and Clark hired a French-Canadian fur trader to serve as a guide for the expedition. His name was Toussaint Charbonneau. So they had a guide. What else might they need if they ran into more Indian tribes? An interpreter. Very good. An interpreter. They were in need of an interpreter. They needed someone to communicate with the Indian tribes they would encounter along the journey. Now, Charbonneau had 2 wives at the time. So Lewis and Clark said, pick one to stay here and pick one to go with us to serve as an interpreter. Okay, so Charbonneau has 2 wives. They're Shoshone Indian wives. And Lewis and Clark told Charbonneau, pick one of them to be an interpreter, and the other one will stay here until we get back. And the one he chose, obviously, was Sacagawea. He chose Sacagawea, which was kind of an odd choice because of her age and the fact that she was very pregnant at the time. She was just 16 years old, which you might weird you out a little bit, but that was not uncommon back in those days. And she was also pregnant. So Charbonneau is going to choose Sacagawea to be the interpreter that will go with the Lewis and Clark expedition in the spring. At the time, she's 16 years old and pregnant. Now, as much publicity and good feelings that Sacagawea gets, she really wasn't much service until late in the expedition when they were getting closer to the Pacific. She wasn't a big asset, to be honest with you, until then. And Lewis and Clark called her Janie. Called her Janie. Why would they call her Janie? Why would they call her Sacagawea or Sakakawea? What? These are pretty formal guys.
Jamie or Jane?
Janie. What do I have on there? Do I have it on there? Oh, well, anyway, I've got Janie. Janie. Why would they call her Janie instead of Sacagawea or Sakakawea? These guys are pretty formal guys. They didn't want to screw up her name. They didn't want to say it wrong, so it was just easy for them to just call her Janie. And that's what they did. They just referred to her as Janie. Now, Janie meant girl or girly in frontiersman talk. And when they tried to write Sacagawea in their journals, it's documented that they had 8 different spellings of Sacagawea in their journals when they got back. So it was just easier for them to call her Janie, and that's what they did. And Janie was a frontier slang for girl or girly. Now, she is going to be helpful in 2 other ways other than being an interpreter. Okay, there's 2 other things that she's going to provide during the journey that's going to be important. Now, here it is. This expedition is run under what control or what philosophy? Military. So would that not give, like the Teton Indians, which it did, the idea that this was a military operation, a hostile operation, with the idea that they were ready to fight? There's no question about that. And that's why I think the Teton Indians went, whoa, look out here, okay? Because they saw it as a military operation, okay? If you have a woman with you, the Indians are not going to see this as a military operation, and it saved a lot of conflict and judgmental attitudes on the part of the Indians of thinking that these guys were here for hostile reasons, because they had a woman. So one of the ways she was helpful, other than being an interpreter, is she would show, her presence would show these Indians that the expedition was not a war-seeking mission. They would never bring a woman on a war party, so to speak. So it really helped ease tensions anytime Lewis and Clark met with any Indian tribes. They would see the woman, a Native American woman, on top of that, and it just helped a little bit with any conflict. Secondly, and they're going to need to do this later because food is going to become a problem, she could advise the expedition on plants that were edible compared to those that were not edible or dangerous or poisonous. So she has enough experience there that she can point out to the expedition what plants along the trip you could eat for nourishment and which ones you should stay away from. But she will serve as an interpreter late in the expedition that will prove to be very, very beneficial. But basically, from the time, we'll get to that, but from the time they leave the Mandan villages until they get to over the Rocky Mountains, she's going to be basically someone that's helping them avoid war, and she's also going to be one that helps them know which plants you can eat. Well, prior to departure, on February 11th, 1805, what did Sacagawea do? She gave birth to a son who was given the Christian name of Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau. So on February 11th of 1805, prior to their departure from the Mandan villages, Sacagawea gives birth to a son who was given the Christian name Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau. Now, prior to their departure from the Mandan villages, Mandan Indian Chief Black Calf is going to provide the expedition with some good things before they depart. So as Lewis and Clark prepare for their departure in April, Mandan tribal leader Black Calf is going to provide 3 important items for the expedition prior to their departure. What's he going to provide them with?
Horses.
No, not yet, no. Not yet.
Boats.
Nope.
Blankets and stuff.
Nope.
Whatever.
Boats.
What are they going to need before they leave for the winter? What would be nice to take with them?
Food.
Food. He's going to sell them food. That would be non-meat. Sell them food. Second thing he's going to do is he's going to allow the expedition to hunt buffalo with them, because they're very possessive of that, correct? And we'll get into that later. And they're going to be able to take some buffalo meat with them. So he's going to, Black Calf is going to sell the expedition food. He's going to allow the expedition to hunt buffalo with them and then take some of that buffalo with them. But what else is he going to give them that they don't know?
Instructions.
That's right, advice on how to get up the Missouri River. Now, here's the last thing we'll say today. Before they leave the Mandan villages, they actually send their keel boat back to St. Louis. And they send 12 of the men back with the boat. Why would they do that, Wyatt? Why would they send 12 men in their keel boat back? It's going to be a long time before they get back. What?
Less mouse feed.
No?
So they know that they're alive.
Close. They send dispatches back to President Jefferson, so he knows, like Julie said, that they're on their way. They're still going. So they send messages back with these 12 men and their keel boat for President Jefferson. Well, if they were just going to send messages, would they send the keel boat back and 12 men? No, they'd probably send one messenger. They also sent back live specimens back to Jefferson. The two most notable, magpies, and they named these, by the way, and they still have the same name, prairie dogs. They sent back live specimens of magpies and prairie dogs. So, and you might think that's stupid, but these guys have never, no one's ever seen magpies or prairie dogs. Okay? And then they also sent back to Jefferson